Okay, thank you, everyone. And thank you for coming back in such a timely manner. Fantastic. So as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a part of discussion now. Very happy to have questions on items that we may have covered earlier, reactions, comments, etc. But hopefully it will start our discussion about preprint feedback and review, the value and the potential uses of this. Delighted to have those who are participating online on camera as well, and I'll try to keep an eye on everybody's hands in different places, so bear with me while I try to do this. Great. Maybe to get started, I thought we could introduce a couple of questions that we had already posted on slido.com, and again, if you have any other questions, particularly if you are tuning in virtually, feel free to continue posting through the platform, and we'll keep an eye on that and introduce the questions. Another final item, what I'm going to ask is, please, if you are contributing, if you could briefly introduce yourself, just so we all know who's speaking, etc. We have a couple of settings and a diverse group here, so just to make sure that we are all aware. Okay. So I guess the first question I'm going to introduce, and I invite anybody from the audience to respond to this or to react to this, is a question from Anastasia Christakou, who was asking, given the disproportionately increasing workloads, particularly for certain groups, such as women and carers, how will reviewer demographics represent the breadth of the field's concerns or expertise with editors? And I guess that this relates to some of the points that we had this morning regarding the potential for preprint review to open up that contribution from any researcher and hopefully increase this diversity in participation in preprint review. But are there ways in which we can actually see this happening in practice? We have also seen that there are not so many public comments on preprint. So are we seeing this happen in practice in terms of increasing that diversity? And if not, are there any ways in which we can hopefully address this? So any comments or reactions from the audience? And please raise your hand.
Are we allowed to rate the shelves?
Sorry?
Are we allowed to rate the shelves?
Oh, yes, please use
Yeah,
the...
I think, yeah, the guy on the right has the best shelves, for sure. Yeah.
Sorry. Anybody who would like to contribute?
That's the mischief that you...
Maybe I could comment on that.
Yeah.
So I think this question of disproportionate representation among certain groups in reviewers is a really important one, but also it's not one that's unique to preprint review. I think that there's a lot of underappreciated work being done for journals as well. And to me, I think that making review recognized as the scholarship that it is will help to realize the contributions of many different groups, not make it just something that people with the luxury of a lot of spare time can participate in. So.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Jessica. Yeah, I see a hand up over there, so feel free to either use the stand-up microphone.
I work on women in science and general diversity in pulling things in to not just the scientific labs, but also in publishing. And with the preprint peer review, you actually have a better opportunity of increasing the diversity because you're not having an editor contact someone necessarily for a review. And there's an incredible inherent bias when editors, even, they don't think about it in finding reviewers of a wide range of diversity. So I find the opportunity here with the preprint peer review an excellent place to increase diversity, especially if you're pulling in preprint servers like Africa Archive and all of those other preprint servers that are directed toward particular areas. And if you could get groups like 500 women scientists involved in these preprint peer reviews, I think you can, again, increase an incredible amount of diversity. So I think this is a huge opportunity where there's less of a block to increasing diversity.
Very important comment. I guess something that Laurie was referring to that I think may be relevant is trying to be a little bit proactive as well in engaging with those groups. I think it's something that many journals have also grappled with in terms of can we increase diversity, but actually who's reviewing for us, and if we don't have some information as to the reviewer demographics, etc., it's a bit tricky. Sorry, Jessica.
I just want to point out that Daniela has her hand raised, but yeah.
So shall we go with Daniela first, and then the other person in the room, please, Daniela.
Thank you so much. Daniela Faderi here, you see her pronounced. I'm the co-founder and director of Pre-Review. I have a huge FOMO just seeing you all in person, but I'm glad that Sam Hindle is there to represent us. I just wanted to say that this is like at the very topic that I think we are, it's really close to our heart at Pre-Review, as we really started with this idea of like really wanting to help early career researchers engage in preprint review, and made it our mission to try to increase on another equity piece to the peer review process via preprint review. So I do believe that, as the comments that have been just made, that preprint reviews are an opportunity for us to really increase the inclusion of and participation to scholarly evaluation. But I also want to recognize the need for intentional recognition of the reasons why we got where we are here. In a very non-diverse, in a very non-inclusive space, and making sure that as we understand like the legacy of the system of oppression that have built our history, we can really start addressing these issues and moving forward. What do we need to do to really truly accept? I don't think that just increasing the pool of reviewers, diversity of reviewers is the solution, but also a lot of training and understanding of why we got where we are and what do we need to do to, from an equity lens, to really create resources, opportunities, partnerships, and then build on the trust of communities that have been exploited for so many times, and not use as tokens to say, oh, we have more diverse. And I'm not saying that's what we're saying, but I think there is a lot of intentional work that needs to be done. And in addition to adding just diversity as the kind of goal. But yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Important additions there. We have somebody else, I think, on the standing microphone. Go ahead.
Yeah, Danielle, I concur. So if I take my science policy hat off, put on my social sciences hat on, I think one of the great challenges in review in general, not just preprint review, but in reviews, is that we have no good metrics collected on the diversity of review in general. And so this is a challenge for lots of reasons, but in sort of even an anonymous way, I saw in the poll there was quite a bit of assessment or opinion that we should have reviewer validation of some sort. But as we're thinking about how to increase diversity, whether that's diversity with respect to gender, disciplinary diversity, national origin, tenure and career status is an important aspect to consider as well. We might want to think about how the metrics by which we make the assessments about the richness of diversity are considered, and how we might incorporate those into the validation systems, into measures and metrics for tracking where we are now and where we want to be and where we'll end up being in 5 or 10 years down the road.
Absolutely. The importance of if we want to see a difference in practice, we need to know what the practice is now and whether the interventions that we may put in place are making any difference there. Right. I just wanted to see if there were any other reactions from the audience on this. Otherwise, we did have another. Oh, yes. Sorry. Jamie, please.
I think following up on that, right, rather than, in addition to, not rather than, in addition to, yes and, focusing on the metrics of the reviewer pool, we also have an opportunity to change the processes so that they eventually will be more welcoming to a diverse population of reviewers. And this gets back to Aaron's point of decoupling this from the journal gatekeeping. This gets to the collegiality point. I think that inclusion will flow from all of these if we focus on that aspect in addition.
Thanks, Jamie. Right. I just want to check if there is any other reactions or comments or clarifications on this. Hope I'm not missing anybody on the big screen. Right, so there was another question that came online from Marie McVie. And the question here is, journal independent peer review was attempted before. She mentions Research Square through the Rubric platform, as well as others. Is this moment different, and if so, how? I guess the question is, again, why would this be different if there's been perhaps other attempts in different formats, maybe not related to preprints, that have attempted this element of doing review independently of a particular journal that perhaps didn't have the success that may have been expected? So what's different in the context of preprint review? Comments, reactions, or perhaps if it's not different, what your views are on that?
I don't even know the concept.
Yes,
Oh,
I think the microphone was flying, so there you go.
Yeah, it's on, yes. Dario Taraborelli from Charles Zuckerberg Initiative. I think it's a valid question. At the same time, the one difference is that compared to 5 years ago, the overall ratio of preprints in the life sciences has grown from like a 2-3% to around like 12% compared to the total outputs that you can find on PubMed. So there's definitely more volume of preprints that's happening, and that should create a condition for more of these experiments to have like the actual content and material to be able to take off. The flip side is that I was just having a conversation this morning. 12% is still a very tiny, tiny number. And so we're talking about something like preprinting is already a niche activity among scientists. Reviewing preprints is an even smaller activity. And so to me, what's really key is like bundling incentives for feedback and peer review with incentives for preprint at large. Because without that, we're not going to have a sufficient stream to actually scale what we're trying to do here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I see Katrina here on the second row. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. I also think that there was Axios, which some of you may know about, which was an independent review platform, and essentially that didn't work out. And I think there is something that speaks just to the timing of when these things happen. So Erin talked about this morning when Harold Varmus and Mike Eisen and Pat Brown set up eBiomed. And that was essentially the sort of biology equivalent of arXiv, and no one bought it. No one bought it. And so what they had to do is to go back and actually launch a journal and try and do it from that way. And so there's a real lag in adoption, and that speaks to the lack of incentives around it. But also, I remember when we started at PLOS and the Wellcome Trust said, nope, we'd never get involved in publishing. That's not for us. And then a few years later, they did. And I actually think it's going to have to be partly driven by funder policies, and Ashley spoke to this as well, and then making it easy, and also protecting early career researchers and those most vulnerable to bias, so not just ECRs, but those from the Global South as well, where exposing criticism and making criticism public is genuinely scary for them. And that has to be addressed as well, I think.
Thank you. Yes, I see another hand up here on the right-hand side. Thomas.
Yeah, maybe I can comment a little bit from the review comment side. I think first there has been a cultural shift, compared to 5 years ago or even longer. There has been a pandemic in between that has really sort of woken up the entire community to preprint, and from there to preprint peer review. We also see an increasing now number of journals adopting transparent peer review. That was started sort of 15 years ago and had a sort of a very slow progression. And I think now it's becoming much more of a hopeful path towards a standard. And in the case of Review Commons, I think part of the success really was a little bit in the details. The main idea is the same as before, But the implementation, we try to be careful to be really strictly journal agnostic and to really think that through what it actually means and to the reviewers, how we communicate that and to sort of verify it. But at the same time, include this workflow in an existing ecosystem of journals and remain journal compatible. And I think that was helpful to sort of have a system that is not in the empty space and that is integrated in the existing ecosystem. I think it's still free to evolve in any kind of direction, depending on where the community sees values and also how good we are to reward reviewers in this effort. But maybe this is what has changed from these sort of early pioneering experiments.
Thanks so much, Thomas. So I see somebody here on the standing mic, and then I also, after that, Martin on Zoom. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Daniel Hook. I guess I would reflect on this in the same way that open access has developed. And I still think we're at the very, very early stages of this kind of movement towards a different type of peer review. If you think back to the late 90s and the early 2000s and how open access was accepted, it felt very similar to this. And I think the thing that you have to look at with the change in the open access piece has been the massive energy put into actually changing the culture. It's a very, very big culture change piece, and it's taken 20 years. And, you know, in the UK, where we've put government mandates in place effectively through the RAF, where you see people engaging with it, now some universities are up to 90% of their outputs being open access. But that has taken 20 years to do, and the government basically saying your work won't be considered for funding and won't be considered to help fund the university infrastructure if you don't comply. So it's a very strong mandate. And I wrote a piece a couple of years ago looking at this from a kind of a cultural perspective. And what you see is there are these continual waves of innovation and continual waves of changing of policy and mandates, which have got open access to where it is. And I think you're going to see the same thing with this. It'll be a set of waves. So I think to Marie's point, I don't think anything has changed, but I think we've realize that this is the next thing we need to get on, and now we need the different waves of innovation to get us there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. So, Martin, online, please.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to echo some of the comments that have been made before. In particular, I think with the pandemic and the increase of preprints during the pandemic, the discussion around preprints has gone from should we do it to how can we trust research output and how can we trust preprints? And I think that's led to more discussions around open review. And I think that's maybe kind of changed the minds of editors. And it does seem, I think as been said already, it's still fairly niche. There's maybe one or two disciplines that are really taking this approach of kind of pulling peer reviews. And I guess the kind of follow-up question that I have is what does success of this look like? How can we showcase and champion models where this has worked really well? And for kind of skeptical journal editors in other fields, I wonder what would persuade them to take on this kind of model.
Right. Thanks so much, Martin. We have somebody else there.
May I make a brief request that participants state their name and any relevant affiliation before speaking? Thank you.
Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Zara Weinberg. I'm a postdoc at a currently striking university on the West Coast. I think that a lot of the perspective that's been shared so far about how things are different with post-publication review now is centering the institutions that might share or use these reviews. But I think from my perspective as an early career researcher, one of the really exciting things to me is the democratization of access to reviews and to writing reviews. So I think, obviously 6 years ago or whenever Rubric was, we could hypothetically post these reviews online, but not having any kind of centralized location for posting means it's very easy to get lost. Now I can get together with some of my friends, review a paper, post that review on bioRxiv, and I have a Disqus link, and I can say, here is a record of this review, here is a record of this activity. And so I think that obviously it's important for institutional and journal buy-in to make this a larger movement. But I think that we are just in a fundamentally different era because anyone can post these reviews.
Thank you so much. I think Ron had the hand up earlier. Yeah, we can. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, well, it is a fascinating question to think about what it takes to introduce change. Systems do not like to change. People do not like to change. And that is the fundamental baseline. So, I think, this is part of the discussion of this meeting, too, is really to analyze that question. And it's largely cultural. This is not like, landing someone on Mars or something like that. It's a fundamentally human problem to change what humans value or how, or their behavior. So in terms of what might make the difference, I think it's, kind of the cooperativity of different players in the system that is like the most interesting social engineering part of it. It is not fundamentally just funders, not just scientists, but getting the different parts of, the system to start trying to move together. And, even hopefully at the close of this meeting, I think that would be a good topic to take up at the very end. I think also, again, going back to preprints, that kind of was what happened. Scientists themselves could exercise their agency. That was very important. But, the funders very much pushed it, and the journals also saw the value in it. And, so the question is, what is different now? Conditions have changed. I think everyone has commented on that, and I think that's true. And with these changing conditions, if we as a community feel this is a good direction to go in, then how do we get different parts of the system to see value and start working together? Complicated question, but I think that's kind of the fundamental, challenge almost of this working group is to envision that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Culture change is very difficult, so obviously there will need to be alignment between different stakeholders to make that happen for sure. Any other reaction? Yeah, I see on the other end of the room. Go ahead.
Hi. It was just a kind of quick point to build on what was said earlier and also what you just said, Ron, that we saw during the pandemic that there was a massive mobilization of researchers who wanted to come together to review preprints, and that was because it was a very clear message as to the importance of doing that, the purpose, the impact of what their efforts would be. And I'm just wondering if the outcome of this meeting can be that we can think of a very clear message to communicate to researchers what the benefit is to them and the society. Because I think genuinely people want to do something that contributes to something that's bigger than themselves. And so if we can kind of work out what that is and what the motivation will be, I think we can help to encourage more preprint review and to help to support the researchers who are going to invest the time to do that.
Thank you so much, Sam. I see Denny has the hand up online. Go ahead.
Yep. Thanks a lot. Denis Bourguet, so co-founder of PCI, is just to give you a feedback about our experience at PCI. As some of you know, probably at the beginning, the original idea of PCI was to evaluate preprint, to validate preprint, so authors could just let the preprint in the preprint server without the need of publication. And we have seen that a lot of people could not do that because of the evaluation process. And most of them still need a publication in the journals. This is why we made an association with PCI-friendly journals, and this is why we created Peer Community Journal. So clearly, if there is not a change in the evaluation process by recognizing preprint reviewed and validated by alternative platforms like PCI, people still will need to go for publication in a regular journal. So that's a big change that we need to have. recognition by evaluation committee for sure.
Thanks so much, Denis. Just checking if there are any other reactions here. Otherwise, I just want to comment on a couple of the points that have been raised in the context of, I think it was Sarah who mentioned the democratization of posting those reviews. I think that's something that is really key in all of this. I used to work as an editor for a number of years, and it was very common that we had people say, I want to review for you, invite me to review. And then they may not be invited to review because depending on the expertise or career stage, etc. Well, in preprints now we have this opportunity of you can contribute. And in the same way as Erin was mentioning, you get a link. You don't have to ask for permission. You can just do this publicly and get a link that attests to that contribution. So I think there are a few things that are certainly moving the right direction in terms of change, but a lot of progress is still to be done, of course. Right, any other comments or reactions to this? Otherwise, yes, sorry, please, Damien here in the room.
Damien Pattinson from eLive. So I was involved with Rubric, and as has been pointed out, it was part of the issue was that it was sold as a way in which authors could improve their manuscript. And I think it became clear that actually authors weren't that interested in improving their manuscript. They were more interested in getting published in a journal. And I think this is, this has been the issue that just has come up over and again. And I've got to say, Denis, I mean, I can see why you decided to go for the journal route as something that, was of need, that you felt was needed by your users. But it does feel a bit backward, I think the discussion needs to be that, preprint review needs to be kind of separated from journals, and how can we make them as sort of valuable as possible in and of themselves. And so as soon as you start to introduce journals, then it's kind of, we're sort of back where we started. So I'm curious, not putting you on the spot at all, but I'm curious about why you felt that was so important to PCI, and whether you think it has had a positive effect so far.
But I don't know if Denis wants to react to this. If that was a comment for Denis specifically.
I was asking Denis specifically, but yeah.
So if you want to react briefly, and then I will have Stefano in the room, and I saw some.
You say why we created a peer community journal?
Yeah.
It's just because a lot of people didn't use PCI because they say they know that at the end they will need a publication in a journal. So they have to go to PCI-friendly journals, and some of them are not happy about that because they didn't want to pay APC, article processing charges. And in a lot of fields covered by PCI, there is no diamond open access journal. And this is why we created Peer Community Journal, which is a diamond open access journal, to allow people with a PCI recommended preprint to publish in a regular journal with a version of record that is recognized by their evaluation committee. So this is just to give the opportunity for authors to go from preprint evaluation to publication with a complete open access diamond process. So this is why we started Peer Community Journal. But it's still just one option for authors. Of course, they can still let their preprint recommended in the preprint server, or they can go to PCI-friendly journals.
Thank you so much, Denis. So Stefano here on the microphone.
Stefano Bertozzi. I'm at UC Berkeley, and I'm the editor of Rapid Reviews COVID-19, which is in the process of becoming Rapid Reviews Infectious Diseases. I think this has been a really interesting discussion, and just thinking back on what was said before about diversity, I have to say, sitting in the room and looking at the screen, I can't remember when I've last been in a meeting so white. And so it made me think, well, science is very white, but I guess scientific publishing is even whiter than science. And so when the mention was made about this sort of democratizing peer review and who actually invites peer reviewers and which networks are used, not only do we desperately need the data so that we can track progress, but we need active mechanisms which identify peer reviewers in a more diverse way. And one of the things that the funders who are here are listening, we've recognized in trying to have more diverse peer reviewers that the way how easy it is to validate peer reviewers is really important. If it's harder to validate peer reviewers, then they're less likely to be peer reviewers. And it turns out that that's correlated with diversity. because it's harder to validate peer reviewers in other parts of the world that are less internet savvy in the sense of how to make it easy to validate people. But the other thing I was thinking about, and that we should, just as something for us to keep in mind for the next couple of days, is what are the remaining major bottlenecks? And while I was sitting here, I looked at one of our well-reviewed manuscripts that's posted on one of the preprint servers. And the preprint server prominently says that this manuscript has not been peer-reviewed. And I'm like, yes, it has. And how easy is it to find those reviews? Very difficult. And therefore, how would a journal know? Well, they'd have to know to look. And so I think that we have to figure out, it turns out that for preprint servers, it costs money to link back to reviews and to make that ecosystem work. The funders who support the preprint servers need to help them do that. And the preprint servers themselves have to recognize the importance of linking back and creating that ecosystem. So I think it's important for us today, over the next couple of days, to really identify what are those critical bottlenecks that are standing in the way of us moving more quickly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now Saumya online. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Greetings from Berkeley. So I'm Saumya Swaminathan. I am head of collaborations at Springer Nature. And I have been engaging with ASAP.io and preprints really for a long time, since that very first ASAP.io meeting at HHNI in 2016. And it's really been a phenomenal movement, right? It's been a movement that puts agency in the hands of researchers. And it's been a movement that has become what it is as a result of researchers. And so that's what I would say here and now, which is I see a lot of people from different parts of the ecosystem pushing and speaking about change in a certain way from their perspective within the ecosystem. But fundamentally, I believe that researchers are the agents of change. They are the ones who the entire system relies on, whether you are a funder or an institution or a journal. And they are the agents of change. And so they are the critical entity that needs to be activated and for whom the benefits need to be realized. So I just want to bring that perspective in, because I've been part of many, many, many workshops over many, many years that aren't just about preprints, but are about system issues around open research, reproducibility, what have you. And very, very often, the researcher's voice simply isn't there. There might be one or two people in the audience who represent that perspective. But I think that is the key perspective that we all need to be thinking about. So.
Thanks so much, Saumya. I see Prachi has the hand up online. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, great. So hi, everyone. I'm Prachi Basti. I'm from Arcadia Science. And I sort of wanted to address this question about, we're talking about expanding or diversifying who gets to review, and we're talking about reviewers as this sort of limiting reagent. But, if we want to sort of redefine publishing, when the review's done, public nature of it, how the advancements are encouraged, I think we can also redefine the size and scope and nature of the review itself, right? So I think it'll increase the participants, lower the barrier to entry, the time taken to do all this. We saw that survey results talking about time being a big problem. If people, and not necessarily those who are validated based on the expertise, since the review is public and can itself be gauged, right? So that if we do that, then people can just comment on the aspects of the work that they can address quickly and easily. Many more people can participate, and we can use that to improve the quality of the work. So I just think, it's sort of disheartened to see like really narrow definitions of review and what we're considering that to be, if we want it to actually, focus on improving the work and solving some of the problems with respect to who can participate.
Thanks so much, Prachi. We'll have somebody on the microphone. Please, go ahead.
Sure. My name is Marquis Sokol. I'm here at HHNI Geneva. So I think as a scientist, I've always viewed peer review as an adversarial process. When I submit a work to a journal, I'm trying to get through the peer review process, answer the challenges of my reviewers, and get published. But with what Ron said earlier about cooperativity, I think this is something that needs to become part of peer review and perhaps preprint peer review. Our objective is to create better science. Our objective is to create vigorous science and make the product better, as opposed to having this adversarial process. Now, I think there needs to be some challenge back and forth, but I think too often in the current model, the objectives are lost. It's become more of the reviewers perhaps trying to make sure that this piece of work fits their maybe worldview of what the problem is or what the science is. And so I think we need to come up with ways to make this a cooperative process, find ways to incentivize reviewers to participate and work towards the same goals as the authors in order to produce a better work in the end. And so I think there also needs to be some incentives. We need to think really strongly about what the role of a peer reviewer, especially one who's reviewing as a preprint is. Perhaps we need to elevate that contribution, perhaps even to the level of something that looks more like authorship as a contributor to the work as opposed to a challenger of the work. My role here at Genelia is as a software engineer, so my experience with review has changed a little bit. My contributions are now to open source software, and often our goals in review are towards improving, to generate a better version of the software, to cooperatively do that. And when reviewers contribute new code, or maintainers review contributions to code rather, that together those, the maintainer and reviewer eventually become co-contributors to a common project. And so I would like to see how we could change how we view review to make it a more cooperative process. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I see somebody else here in the room, please.
Yeah.
Oh,
Hi,
yeah,
Raji. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, following up on this comment and earlier comments by Ron and Damien, I think it is indeed about cultural change. And I think it's impossible really to discuss this topic without addressing two issues. The first one is that why is it that scientists or biologists don't want to peer review preprints or review preprints? I think that's the first question. I think it's good to define that. What are the reasons why people don't want to review preprints? And to be able to really come up with incentives and all of that. And the second issue is also why some authors don't want to have their preprints reviewed, which is, I think, equally part of the problem. My second related comment is that I find it impossible to have discussion about peer review without addressing the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is that peer review is an inherently conflicted system. We all have conflicts of interest in doing peer review, and the issue of the so-called academic prisoner dilemma cannot be ignored if we're talking about peer review. For example, what are the incentives for me, even as an established scientist, to basically negatively peer review and openly post a peer review of a preprint of a colleague who will be reviewing my next grant and so on. So I think we need to address that issue of the so-called academic prisoner dilemma that is really the major hurdle against this open system, because otherwise, we are using peer review currently as a form of currency, actually, as a form of really ways of exchanging benefits or exchanging essentially money. The equivalent of money for us is actually doing reviewing and giving feedback to our colleagues and accepting their papers, their grants, and all of that. And I think this goes at the heart of the topic of peer review, and we cannot just ignore it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I see Sarah is there too. Please go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on the idea of incentivizing this, which has come up at multiple points, and I hope that this will be part of the discussion in the next session, but I think that funders play a huge role here, especially funders like one of the co-sponsors of this event that fund people as people instead of specific pieces of work that people do. And so I think that if we are evaluating any kind of researcher for their ability to get funding and produce science in the future, looking at their history of review should be a major part of that evaluation. And I think that if it becomes a fundamental part of that evaluation from different funders, it's going to incentivize people to post their reviews publicly, which is a good thing. And I think it's also going to disincentivize doing closed review, which is the standard right now. If you cannot have some kind of identifier for your review, which is the case at any journal that you would review at now, then you're not going to receive the same kind of evaluation on funding review. So I hope that anybody working at funding agencies is thinking about how to incorporate review in addition to other scholarly works into their evaluation of applicants.
Thank you so much. And certainly we'll have a session tomorrow specifically about recognition for reviews, but important to bear this in mind in all of our conversations. I see a hand up here on the right. Yeah. Gautam.
Gautam Dev from EMBDL in Heidelberg, Germany. So a couple of people have raised this adversarial or kind of inherently conflicted nature of peer review. And I think that's something, I mean, coming back to what Jamie said, it's something that got baked into, I think for most of us, our training as young scientists, doing journal clubs, trying to review papers and basically poke holes in them constantly to be like, why was this even published? What's wrong with it? But somehow, I mean, for preprints, this should be intrinsically uncoupled because the research has been presented to everyone. Anyone can read it. There is no value to shut it down except to constructively improve it because it's already there. You can't take it away, you can't hide it. So the only thing you can do is to try to convince the authors to improve it, in which case it should be completely non-adversarial. So I'm sort of hopeful that this kind of academic prisoner dilemma thing is actually not a feature of preprint review. And as soon as people try it out, they will realize this is the case. So possibly the positive message maybe is that the barrier is not quite as high as some might be fearing. It's just a matter of, forcing people kind of hackathon style into trying it a couple of times, and then they'll be like, actually, this is great. For many people, the gateway is something like Review Commons, where you're given clear instructions, you don't know which journal will end up in, and so the only thing you can do is to write a review where you can tell them experiments to do in a month or 3 months, and then you're done. And it's so liberating. Mm-hmm. I think. Anyway, it's just to say that I think this adversarial thing it's a feature of preprint review that we should advertise more. That it can be intrinsically different as a sociological exercise.
Absolutely. I'm hearing, again, maybe my chairing role side of things, but I'm hearing quite a bit about the principles of what's preprint review and whether it may be useful to articulate this, and some mention why should researchers care, but also this element of what are the practices and principles that are allowed in this format, separated from journal review. But Katrina, please.
I just wanted to respond to that because I think that's really nice, the sense that preprint review could be incredibly constructive and collaborative, and that would provide an incentive. Unfortunately, I think there is at the moment more of an incentive not therefore to do a review for a preprint, because when you do a review for a journal, you get to decide someone else's fate. And that provides in the hyper-competitive system, that provides a huge incentive to do that review for that particular journal and either help them in or make sure they don't get in. And that provides part of the incentive system. And so as long as preprint review competes with journal peer review, I think just because of the nature of the system as it is at the moment, researchers will invest their time in journal peer review more than preprint review. And this speaks to the larger extent than Damien's question of Denis about having to link peer review with a journal. That in itself is a symptom I think, of the culture that things are only important when they're connected to journals. And so I also worry about the whole move towards preprint review is actually embedding the status quo of journals. And there's a lot of preprint platforms who are embedding themselves in with journals in order to get that adoption. And by that very nature, even though it's trying to break the system, it could potentially reinforce the system. It's easy to point out problems. It's difficult to know what the solution is. But ultimately, that more, I think Bianca Kramer and others have called it this sort of extended journal type of system. We could actually end up with more of the same if we're not careful.
Thank you so much, Katerina. I'm mindful of time. I see that there are other people with hands raised. I'm just going to allow Daniela, whose hand I saw a while ago, but if you could keep it brief, Daniela, and then we're going to wrap up this session, and there will be plenty of chances for discussion in breakouts, etc. So, Daniela, if you can just keep it brief, thank you.
Sure. Super brief. I just want to actually reemphasize, also I'm really glad that the constructiveness was brought up because of the opportunity to use preference reviews to also change the cultural aspect of like tearing down. That has been very much actually what brought me to work at peer review in the very first place. And so really working also on this idea that constructive doesn't equal positive. We hear this all the time when we try to we are adding guidelines to the workflow of writing preference reviews. And it's like, oh, does it mean that I need to just be positive? So really also change that mindset that is often we are just raised in academia to just trying to tear down something and the others. So I think just an opportunity to also invest in guidelines and not just for the new preprint reviewers that are coming through, but also for the reviewers that have been reviewing for a long time. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Daniela, and thank you so much to everybody who contributed, and apologies to those who had the hand up and we couldn't get to. We need to move on to the next part of the program. We are going to start a session now on recognizing preprints with peer reviews, starting with hearing the perspective from funders and institutions. And I'm very pleased to present Maria Leptin from the European Research Council, who is going to chair this session. So thank you, Maria.
Okay, apparently I've agreed to chair this session, but I'm sure I'll have to rely on Jessica and Iracha holding my hand and telling me what to say at every single moment. But I do know what I have to say first, and that is that we have two presentations online, but we'll begin. So, and one of them is actually not the same as was announced in the program, because Thomas Guillemot is ill, and Denis, whom we've just seen on screen, will be presenting instead of him. But we start live with Fiona.
Thanks. Have you got some slides for me?
Thanks very much. I know I've been given 12 minutes to present this, but it's a very simple intervention that we've done with a simple output, so I reckon it will take 5 minutes, if that. But to go back to this slide, which I showed earlier, I told you that we publish papers, but we also run competitions where we fund postdoctoral fellows. And the postdoctoral fellowship scheme is to promote transfer of young investigators between countries in Europe and around the world. And it's an attractive and fiercely competitive scheme. And until this year, one of the eligibility criteria for applying for a fellowship was that you had to have a first author publication. This just shows you the level of demand for the fellowships in the top row. It tracks at about 15 or 20% success rate. So on Twitter, we noticed that this comment at the bottom from Andrea Attardi, who was essentially saying, if Review Commons is promoting refereed preprints, why can't I, with a refereed preprint, apply for a postdoctoral fellowship? And we thought that was a pretty fair comment, actually. So we decided that we would give it a go and see what would happen. And I've just pulled out a part of a memo which our head of fellowship sent to the EMBO members who run the fellowship competition. Kelly, she and Rooney wrote them in April 2022. And she said, we're proposing to run this as a pilot. We want to obtain evidence of the level of demand. And then we commented that the thing that we were worried about was that we would see a massive increase in submissions, which would be pretty much impossible for us to process. The need for reviewers to read the referees' reports, actually, I don't feel very sympathetic about, because that is a bit better than simply saying, oh, it appeared in Nature, must be good. And so in discussing this with the EMBA members on the fellowship committee, we felt that it was important that we were internally consistent, and we really wanted to know what would happen. So reporting on the outcome of the pilot, we ran it from April through to August. We saw actually a pretty small number of applicants who had a refereed first author preprint instead of a publication. And the assessment of the quality of those applications was that they were on a par with other applications. Now, of course, whenever you start something new, there's a bit of a lag before people realise. So we may still see a big uptake in submissions. But the good thing was that we were not swamped. And of course, your publications are only one of the criteria which are used to judge your fellowship application. So we announced at the end of the pilot phase that we would continue to consider a first author refereed preprint as equivalent to a first author publication. So one question, and this was a question actually that I had from Jessica quite early on in the planning for this meeting, was, well, how do you define a refereed preprint? And so I downloaded this from the website for postdoctoral fellowships. And so we're saying it's a first author preprint with in-depth peer reviews which are publicly available from a trusted independent preprint peer review platform. And we did not want ringing endorsements on Twitter from your best friend or general comment on placing the paper in the broader context. So we haven't had that many applications yet. We get a lot of queries from prospective postdocs about the scheme, but we've had very, very few about that. So this, at least for a first pass, seems to be going fine. One of the things, though, that we were also interested was the potential impact that this would have on fellowship competitions in general. So I think for a group leader applying for a grant or a fellowship, it's very unlikely that they will only have one senior or first author publication. So I think this intervention is really important for young scientists just at the start of their careers. And it goes back to the point I made earlier, which other people have echoed, that publication should not be binary, unpublished, published, but you can show as a researcher where you are in the journey, and somebody who's evaluating your productivity, your outputs, can see for themselves what they would like. So for us, one of the things has been removing this binary published, unpublished. Another thing, and I speak really from the heart, is that I've had over the years quite a few postdocs who really, really, really wanted to get their paper into a particular journal, but they had months of more experiments to do, and they could see a crunch approaching, for example, for applying for a job. And so then they would have to say, well, am I going to pull the journal and pull the paper from this journal and publish it somewhere else quickly, or will I gamble on the paper being accepted in the time frame that I need? So we feel that if allowing refereed preprints to be assessed as equivalent to a paper for grants and fellowships, we think that this would really help. As I've said, it also helps the reviewers of a grant application to focus not just on where the paper was published, but on what the reviewer said about it. This actually was not uniformly popular with the assessors on our scheme because they have a large volume of grants to process and they're very keen to be fair. But I do believe that taking a look at the referees' reports, we're all pretty experienced, so we can have a look at the paper and the referees' reports and, of course, the author's response. So I think that's important. And so what we would really like is that since our experience has been positive, much larger funders would consider this and say the refereed preprints are equivalent to full publications. So that's all that I wanted to say, and thank you for listening.
So we take questions afterwards. Yeah. Save up your questions. Yeah. But I've seen you, so you're going to go first. Okay, so now we switch to online, and Denis, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, you got
hear me?
slides or anything? Yeah, we can hear you, we can see
Yep.
you.
I do have slides, but are you sharing the screen for me or?
We have to do it here? Okay. Oof.
If you want.
Yes.
Excellent.
You move it.
Thanks.
You move
I
it,
have
yeah.
the way.
Okay, good.
Go ahead, Denis.
Thanks a lot. So I'm not Thomas Guillemot, I'm Denis Borges, I'm co-founder. Thomas is ill, so he's sorry to not giving the talk, but he's listening to us. So I'm giving the talk about French graduate programs recognizing PCI and for graduation requirements. Next slide. Yep. So a few words about open science in France before. So open sciences became a governmental priority for the last few years. So with in 2016, a law for digital republic. And in 2019, there was the launch of the National Plan for Open Science. And the idea behind this is to make all articles freely available to readers. There is also a move from the National Research Funding Agency in France, which became part of the European Coalition S. And I will let Johan talk about this next talk. Next slide. So the publication system is very costly. So we have an estimate for France with an estimate of 150 million per year, which is the fourth of the research call budget for National Research Funding Agency. And the gold open access with article processing charges is very costly for our institutions. There are some solutions for this. For example, the green open access, where people are encouraged to put their article as preprint in ALT system, for example, the French system. There's also good quality diamond open access journals with overlay journals, but it's not on all disciplines. For example, it's true for mathematics and humanities, but not necessarily in biology. And of course, there is a solution of using preprints, but what we need is not only preprints, but it's an evaluation and a validation of preprints. Next. So this is why we started PCI, to offer a way to not only have peer review of preprint, but a validation with a publish, review, curate, so a PRC model. So the aim of PCI is to create communities of researchers handling the evaluations through peer review and recommending preprints in their scientific field. So we allow people to use many different preprint servers, of course, bioRxiv, Archive, Zenodo in the French system, they can use HAL, OSF preprints, etc. We started the first community in 2017, PCI Evolutionary Biology, followed by PCI Ecology, and now we have 16 different PCIs. Next. So this is a slide to explain you a little bit how PCI is working. So if authors want to submit a preprint for evaluation to a PCI, they first need to deposit it in a preprint server. We also ask them to deposit the data, scripts, and code in an open repository. So this is the first step. Then they can go to the second step and submit to a PCI. So for example, if it is a preprint in ecology, they go to the PCI ecology website. There is a submission form where they indicate the authors, the abstract, the link to the preprint. So for example, if it is in bioRxiv, they give the GUI to bioRxiv. What they will do also is to suggest recommenders. What we call recommenders at PCI is the equivalent of associate editors in traditional journal. There is a validation step by the managing board. And once they have done this, there is an alert sent to the recommenders so they can have a look on the preprint and see if they are interested by starting the evaluation process. It can happen that none of the recommenders is interested by starting the evaluation process. In that case, the preprint is not considered for evaluation and the authors can submit it elsewhere for evaluation. But if one of the recommenders is interested by the preprint, they can organize a peer review process. They will invite reviewers via the PCI platform, and based on at least 2 peer reviews, they will make an editorial decision. This can be to reject the paper. This can be to ask a revision to the author. In that case, they will deposit a second version answering the remarks of the reviewers and the recommender. So there can be several rounds of peer review like this. Or a third option is an acceptance of the paper. So at the end of the process, even if there are several rounds of peer review, the preprints will be rejected or accepted. In case of acceptation, there will be 2 things happening. First, the authors will deposit a final version in the preprint server, which is a PCI recommended preprint, and the recommender will write a recommendation text, which is a kind of news and view explaining the context of the preprint and the quality of the preprint, if it is a good data set, a very good paper, etc. And we will publish this recommendation text with all the reviews and all the editorial process on the PCI website. Next. So what about this PCI recommended preprint? So we have started the discussion. People can leave this PCI recommended preprint in the preprint server and considered this as a final end of the process. I mean, this is a valid preprint, this is a valid article, and that should be enough. But as I said before, a lot of people still need publication for the evaluation committee, for being recruited, for being promoted in their countries. So there are several options. First, they can decide to publish it in peer community journal. We started this journal a year ago. So people can decide to have a direct transfer without further peer review, of course. And this is Diamond Open Access Journal. Or they can decide to submit it to PCI-friendly journal or to any journal accepting preprints because it is still a preprint without a version of record. Next. So there are big consequences of using PCI. This is big savings for research agencies. We estimate the cost of a paper by PCI and peer community journal at €300 per paper. The results are accessible to all right away because we are using preprints. There is a transparency of data, methods, scripts, code, and there is also a transparency of evaluation. And of course, and this is a purpose here of preprint review, a single evaluation may be used by many journals. And PCI is also a way to recognize the reviewers and recommenders' work because we do publish the reviews and the recommendation decision and recommendation text at the end of the process. Next. So we start to have some recognition, and this is the purpose of the talk, by international institutions. So mainly in France at the beginning with INRAE, my institution, Thomas Institution, and CNRS, and a lot of French universities, but step by step by foreign universities like Belgium universities and UK universities. Next. Importantly, we start to have some recognition, mainly in the French system, but we hope that it will be true in other countries. For example, we have recognition by evaluation, by all evaluation committees at INRAE, at CNRS, ERD, and university. And this evaluation committee publicly stated that they consider the preprints recommended by the PCI the same value as articles published in indexed scientific journals. So I'm clearly talking about preprints recommended by PCI, not on the publication on peer community journal. And in addition, PCI is now well known in France and abroad, but in France, notably by all institutions, national research institutes, and funders. Next. And in the French system for grad programs, publication in indexed journal is required to defend a PhD thesis. So what we did with Thomas and Marjolaine Hamelin, we contacted a lot of doctoral schools in France for asking them to recognize publicly the preprint recommended by PCI. And most of them publicly stated that PhD students can defend their thesis if they have at least one accepted article in a journal or one preprint submitted, evaluated and recommended by a PCI. So just to finish, it's a list of, next slide. It's a list of doctoral schools in France, mostly in France, but one in the University of Sevilla and one in Portugal. So more to come. We are still contacting doctoral head of doctoral school for having such a recognition. So this was just to give you an overview of what we are currently doing for making PCI recommended preprint recognized in evaluation committee and like grad programs. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you, Denis. Just because you started talking about finances, there's one irony which we may want to keep for later discussion, and that is, of course, this is about your 300 per preprint. There's no cost for posting on bioRxiv, but bioRxiv costs money, which is, ironically, at least in part currently coming from, guess what? Journals. So I think that's a conversation we can pick up later. Okay, but first we get to Johan, who Denis has already referred to.
Sorry, can I make a quick correction, because that statement is actually not accurate. So, like, the vast majority of revenue for bioRxiv come from philanthropic funding and from in-kind support from the institution, Spring Harbor. The revenue from journals is negligible when it comes to operation.
Well, then you should perhaps cut it out.
Just happy to follow up on that.
Yeah, thank you. Good. Anyway, it is Johan's turn, and I see you up there on the screen, and give you the floor.
Yes, thank you, Maria. I realize I may have animated my slides, so that may not have been a good idea, but you just click through as I'm speaking. I have my slides on part of my screen. So next slide, please. Yes, so first, an introduction of Coalition S, which is probably not necessary, but Coalition S is a global alliance of funders, 28 organizations worldwide, national funders from Australia to the UK. European Commission is on board with Horizon Europe. A number of charitable foundations, including American charitable foundations like HHMI and Bill & Melinda Gates. Global dimension with World Health Organization, Jordan, Zambia, and South Africa on board, investing about 35 billion in research funds annually, and with an output of about 150,000 articles a year, just to give you a situation of what we do. Next slide, please. I can't see the next slide yet.
Oh, it's displaying here. Can you see it now?
Oh, it's not displaying. I cannot see it.
It says Plan S, a single goal with 10 principles.
Yes,
Shall I try one back and see if...
Yeah, I don't know. Yes, maybe. Yeah? No, now I see it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
That helped. Yeah, so Plan S has a single goal, namely to make all scholarly publications funded by funders available in open access, and available in open access either in journals or in repositories or in preprint servers, if you like. So we believe that all peer-reviewed scholarly publications must be available in immediate open access with a CC BY license or equivalent. And one of our principles, Principle 10 more specifically, say that funders commit when assessing research outputs that they will value the intrinsic merit of the work and not consider the publication channel, impact factor, or other metrics. So that basically means do not use traditional metrics or prestige proxies. And that is, I think, important because that made us think about, the evolution in publication, in academic publishing. Next slide, please. Hope it works this time. Yes. So basically, we had a discussion within the coalition of what it means to be a peer-reviewed scholarly publication. And because these are generally, of course, interpreted as peer-reviewed articles published in scholarly journals or platforms. But of course, if we were true to our principle 10, we should dissociate these two elements, right? The publication is not the same as the publication in a peer-reviewed journal. And this is something that we wanted to clarify by our statement of 6 July 2022. A lot of this was indeed also inspired by conversations that I had with Thomas and with others. But what was interesting is what the entire coalition followed us in that, namely, because of course, if you implicitly say that peer-reviewed scholarly publications are interpreted as journal publications, then you give particular prominence to those, right? And this is not something that we want. And we saw the emergence of journal-independent peer reviews, peer community insight, next generation repositories, and many, many others. And this led us to the statement of 6 July 22, saying that peer-reviewed publications are viewed by us as scholarly papers that have been subject to a journal-independent standard peer review process with an implicit or explicit validation, that those kinds of publications are considered to be of equivalent merit and status as peer-reviewed publications in a recognized journal. So we explicitly put on the same level peer-reviewed preprints as on the same level as peer-reviewed publications. That was an important clarification on our behalf, which goes entirely in the direction of what PCI is doing, of course. Next slide, please. So, journal-independent peer review, in our view, focus on the intrinsic value of the peer-reviewed article, which is explicitly stated in our article, in our Principle 10. It provides independence from the traditional journal format. It clearly separates reviewing services from publication services, and this is important for us because as funders, we would, in the ideal case, want to pay a separate price for separate distinct services. And it also, of course, allows for much more equitable access to research results by offering an open access solution for all researchers, not just those who can pay for article processing charges. Next slide, please. So one of the things that you will have noticed in the coalition's statement is that it carefully avoids the term preprint. And I would say pre what? Because print really is something of the 20th century. I mean, my own journal, Glossa, for instance, doesn't have a print version. I think many journals do not have a print version. Who wants print? So it really refers to an outdated concept. Preprint has also this kind of connotation of low value, preliminary, provisional, unfinished, and we should get rid of that. I mean, if we are going to take preprint seriously, that requires, I think, a change in terminology. So why not just call it publication? As Robert Kiley always says, publish is make it available on the internet, and then it is published. Period. There is no difference. Rather, I think we should go towards a record of versions including open reviews, all linked via dependent DOIs, and Crossref allows for this possibility. And we should start talking, I believe, but this is a proposal, of course, that can be opposed. I believe personally we should start talking about pre-review version, which corresponds to, let's say, preprint, post-review journal, which corresponds to peer-review preprint, and perhaps final version. I mean, again, this is just a proposal. This is not written in stone. So for me, the big questions are, how do we normalize open peer review? When I talk about that in my community, I always get a lot of pushback. It's not saying that I haven't tried. I have tried, but it's really very hard to convince people of the merits of it. So my own opinion about this is that we should do this gradually and allow reviewers themselves to make reviews open as if they want to. But that's my opinion. And I also think another problem is that we need new qualitative proxies for assessing research outputs. For instance, eLife's assessments. I think that is an excellent idea. So we should have a reflection across the various disciplines, so not just in the biomedical field, but also in the social sciences and humanities, of what these assessments might look like across disciplines, because obviously we do not have the same epistemic traditions across disciplines, and you would have to think very hard what such assessments could look like to function as an insightful proxy for quality. Change in research assessment, as you know, is coming. COARA was established just this morning in Europe to change research assessment. So how can we make a record of versions and open peer review fit into that? That, I think, is the question before us in the next few years. Thank you. I think I will stop here. That's my last slide, if all goes well. Yeah.
Thank you so much to Johan and all the speakers. We're now going to break for lunch, but immediately following lunch, we're going to have breakout sessions. So these sessions are for.
James of his question.
So I think we have like 10 minutes. Is that fine? Okay. So is there a catch box for
sure.
Jamie? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think the EMBO fellowship stuff is an interesting start. And I wonder if now that the response has not been so much of a catastrophe in terms of reviewer load, that rather than expanding laterally across other funders, if you guys can expand within EMBO, to recognize preprints rather than worry about refereed preprints as enough for eligibility to submit for these types of fellowships. And one twist on that could be that since the reviewers are obviously qualified enough to review the fellowship proposal, and part of reviewing the fellowship proposal is reviewing the fact that these people have posted preprints in their thing, that they could then be enabled to review the preprints themselves as part of that activity.
I am not disagreeing with what you're saying, but EMBO is a small organization, and assessment, for example, if we're electing EMBO members, they will be very eminent in their fields. They will have been, quite far on in their careers. So this would be, we could, they could have preprints or reviewed preprints. It wouldn't really make a big difference. We could extend it to the next group of people who are the young investigators, and that would be fine. But I am a bit worried about having. So we've got the postdoc fellowships. We could extend it to the other schemes, but I'm a bit worried about asking somebody to review a grant and also review the preprint on which the grant application is made, because we work these people really hard, and I think also you would want fresh eyes. And I know from being involved in another funding organization previously, you get a peer review of the grant applications, but when the committee meets, they know the identity of the reviewers and they will say whether or not they're plausible. So to protect the scientist, I favour having the peer review of the papers different from the peer review of the grant application. But that's just my off-the-cuff response.
It's also not the case that they're actually all experts, because for the initial screening, they don't have experts for everyone. It's a bit difficult. There's another. First of all, I think it was great to see these three talks and to see the success. It seems to me that PCI, clear success, EMBO, clear success, and we'll see what comes out of COARA, etc. But also that Coalition S has adopted this change. So we've heard that only a very small proportion of papers are preprints, and even smaller of them are reviewed. But even so, if big organizations make a step, that's very impressive. Okay, we'll have a question over there.
Fiona Husson, eLife. So before we rolled out our new model of eLife, we spoke to a lot of funders, a lot of institutions, and one of the things that came through very clearly from the institutions was, if we were trying to replace the journal as a sort of proxy in research assessment, how would the review preprint fulfill that goal? And one of the clear things that came through was the inclusion of those eLife assessments enabled the people that were assessing those particular grants to use them rather than reading the reviews. So I think what came across very clearly was that they don't want to just see reviews. They want that next step, which is a curation step, whether that's something like eLife assessments or whether it's a recommendation like PCI does. But I think that should be clearly one of the things that we're thinking very deeply about.
Okay. Yeah.
There's a question from Salmia on Zoom.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Samia again from Berkeley. Great talks. And let me just preface my question by saying that I fully support transparency. Nature and a bunch of Nature journals have begun publishing reviewer reports really catalyzed by ASAP Bio and the leadership that ASAP Bio has taken in that arena. I'm a huge proponent of DORA and the general move away from an over-reliance on journals as an indicator of, as the sole indicator of quality. Now, with all that said, I do have some questions about how one can systematize a way of assessing the quality, the reliability of a paper based on transparent, reports that are available in the public domain that doesn't somehow also end up defaulting to one's reliance on personal networks and one's reliance on trust of individuals. Who are perhaps providing these reports, perhaps the authors of the papers and so on. And so that's just a question I'm throwing out because I think as we move forward, we must as a community think about the inadvertent effects of the way we systematize certain processes. And certainly, the current system of evaluation and assessment it's not free of any of the sort of issues that I'm raising around affinity bias and network bias. But I just want to throw that out there and really bring it out into the open as something that we do need to think about as well.
Okay.
And one of the reasons.
Good points. I am going to have to hand back to Jessica in a moment. So it's been thrown out. We will talk about these over lunch. I think we're going to have to stop questions now. Just another quick point. Of course, open peer review, transparent peer review is older than any of this discussion. It was started a long time ago that the reviews were published alongside papers, and it's strange that it's taken so long for that to be adopted more generally. Anyway, great discussion. Those of us who are here can continue over lunch, and the rest will meet again in breakout sessions, and that's what Jessica will. You'll tell us how to do all that, right? Okay, off you go, Jessica.